Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 241 and we have a good one for you today. As you can probably tell by the title, we have an extra special episode for you today because we're going to talk about a special animal. And this is actually at the request of my little bitty Ping, the little princess, Princess Ping. This is one of her favorite animals, at least favorite aquatic animals. Haven't raised her right. She hasn't chosen a real fish yet because she has chosen the jellyfish. Now the jellyfish, and I can't really give you scientific names. Has a very wide range of how would you want to say what jellyfish look like. When you just go jellyfish in images, you're going to have a ton of there. And that is because jellyfish are actually an incredibly complex group of animals. And they're so complex, I'm not even sure how to describe them. It's actually very difficult to just describe a jellyfish. But they've been called jellyfish for a long time. Jellyfish is a term that's been used since 1796. Now, recently, scientists are kind of calling them jellies or sea jellies. They're trying not to use the word fish with them because fish have connotation. I can't tell you how many times people have heard about the YouTube channel and they're like, ooh, have you done jellyfish? And I'm like, it's not a fish. But what the princess wants, she gets. And so we're going to talk a little bit about jellyfish. Jellyfish are found all over the world at all depths. Some of them are even found in freshwater, and they're found in all shapes, sizes, colors. You'll find them at the deepest, darkest oceans to things like the man of war that are actively floating on top. They range from less than 1 millimeter in bell height and diameter to nearly 2 meters, which is 6.5 feet in diameter for their bell. And that is mind-boggling because the bell is what you would almost call the head of the jellyfish. So I need to get back to it. Maybe here. Where are those? Okay. So like the head would be, or the bell would be like the head part, what people think of on the head. And so the smallest are these little creeping jellyfish that are around 0.5 millimeters to a full few millimeters, like 1 or 2, 3 maybe. And they're crawling around on the surface of seaweed or in the bottom of rocky pools. And you almost can't fathom how small that is. It's absolutely tiny. Then you get to the big ones. There's a few that could actually be considered the largest jellyfish. There's the lion's mane jellyfish, which is, pretty well known, is popular. It's, definitely the longest. Apparently the lion's mane jellyfish has reached lengths up to 36.5 meters, which is 119.75 feet long. I do know the Portuguese man of war can get extremely long as well. But the lion's mane actually does have some decent size. The lion's mane bell can be around 1 meter, which is 3.3 feet. However, that's the kind of the longest, but the heaviest would be the Nemoras. The Nemoras, which actually both of them are in the genus Nemora, but this is actually considered the Nemora's jellyfish. The Nemoras would be the largest and heaviest bell, which remember that's up here. Apparently the bell can get up to around 2 millimeters. 2 meters. This is the one that's about the 6.5 feet. And they can weigh up to about 200 kilograms, which is around 440 pounds in weight. Now the lion's mane bell is usually around 1 meter, which is 3.3 feet. So they're probably weighing around, they're still pretty heavy and dense. I'm gonna say their bells probably weigh around 250, maybe up to 300. It's a little like 125 kilograms. So, you think, you have this 2 millimeter size thing going up to something this size that people swim with. And they do swim. Not all of them swim. Some of them actually don't even move at all. Some of them crawl, some of them swim. But, it's just really weird how to describe them. And how light most of them are and why they can actually survive. And that's actually because of their body shape. So the bell is primarily hollow. It's empty. It's filled with this liquid called the mesoglia, or the mesoglia. And the mesoglia is 95% water. That's why they can survive at all depths and why they can't hold any shape out of water. For anybody who lives around beaches, you know that sometimes you have to keep on the lookout for, essentially washed up jellyfish, especially after a jellyfish bloom. They have no internal structures to hold any sort of shape. But they have the bells, the stomach and the mouth is within there, and that's basically all they are, is internally pretty much only, a stomach, a mouth on the outside, and stomach and mesoglia on the inside. Sorry. Some of them actually can produce light, but those are actually not. A lot of the ones that produce light are actually not considered jellyfish, even though they're called jellyfish. I believe they're called like the box jellies and stuff like that. It's really weird. I mean, it's hard to describe exactly in broad terms of jellyfish, but most of them do have their tentacles, and then they have their larger tentacles that that's what they use to help when they're eating. And how most of them do that is with the nematocysts. And that is what people think of when they think of a jellyfish sting, which is actually a pretty bizarre cycle. This obviously looks like a kid's drawing, but it's actually a fairly good representation of what the nematocyst is. So the nematocysts are these stinging cells that are essentially on trigger systems throughout up and down the tentacle, and that's what's delivering the sting. They have this nitocil, which when that trips, you can see it here off this hinge, it releases this hinge. You can see the threads are under a ton of pressure, and then what happens is they shoot out, and these barbs stick into the skin of anything that's touching it. And that's actually what's causing the sting, with the poison that go there. And some of the jellyfish poisons are actually extremely dangerous, as many of you are probably already aware of. Some of them don't really produce any toxins at all, and some of them, I don't even know. There has to be. There's probably quite a few species out there that don't even have nematocysts at all. So, it's very important to know what you're basically up against. It's why one of the most common things is basically stay away from jellyfish, because there's a lot of them, and some of them can be extremely dangerous, which is why they have such a complex relationship with humans. Humans are fascinated by jellyfish just as a whole. And I think a large portion of that is actually because of how unique they seem to us and how different from us they are. And they are extremely different. But there's no denying that these jellyfish are just beautiful. Beautiful, especially when they're in their, like this one, the sea nettle jellyfish. Look how beautiful that is. So that's why it's so complex, is like humans seem actually drawn to these things, but they aren't necessarily the best things to be drawn to. But it's not just from an aesthetic standpoint, which I want to mention on the aesthetics. There's actually a lake, I believe in South America, where you can go scuba diving, and there's a ton of jellyfish. Maybe it's over in Asia, but there's a bunch of jellyfish that essentially can't sting you. They're able to just like glide through oceans of jellyfish because they have these jellyfish blooms. And that's really neat. But beyond that, they actually have a lot of use in like science and the medical field. As many of you have probably heard, there's something called the immortal jellyfish, which just kind of reverses its aging process. And there's a lot of studying that goes into that. And from my understanding, a lot of people are unclear on exactly what's going on in a jellyfish. It's why, like, how it can process where to go and what to do, sort of thing. Or is it just complete floating? It's just a real complex, like, people want to look at them for their beautiful. Scientists want to study them for their unique curiosity and all their venoms and stuff like that. But they're just an intensely complex organism to actually study, because how do you dissect it? How do you grab it? It's just very, very difficult. But for the interesting fact we're going to end the video on, it's actually it doesn't have to do with like the lion's mane or the Nemoras or the size or the small one. It's actually their life cycle. And that's because it has an actual incredible life cycle that's really, really complex. So the Medusa, when you think jellyfish, that's only one life stage of a jellyfish. That's the Medusa life stage. And the Medusa will carry both eggs and sperm. They'll be released into the water, and the eggs and sperm will meet, and they'll perform a planula larva, which is essentially just a tiny larva with a bunch of cilia, which is little tiny hairs that they use to move around. And those planula larvae just kind of float around and travel around until they find a hard surface, a firm surface. Then it'll turn into these polyps. You can see here these polyps. And these polyps can be confused with regular anemones, sponges. It's really, really bizarre. And this is where some jellyfish life cycles like completely end. And then they usually have this cup with these upward facing tentacles. But that's not always the case. Some of these polyps are actually free floating. They'll just float around. Some of them are actually attached to animals, like they'll be attached to fish, they'll be attached to whales and stuff like that. This is why jellyfish are so incredibly complex. But for this intents and purposes, the majority of them, let's say they're attaching to a rock that you can completely confuse with like anemones unless you know exactly what you're looking for. And so these polyps have these stalks with the cup, the tentacles. This is where it's actually spending most of their years in there. The Medusa traditionally only lives like 2, 3, 4 years, not a long time. But then these polyps will actually start splitting. You can see here, they'll start splitting into what are called a phyra, which you could almost call like a baby jellyfish, or a larval jellyfish, a juvenile jellyfish. So you can see here, a phyra are just microscopic. They're tiny, tiny, tiny. And oh, this is a good one right here. This is another good one. Kind of showing the life cycle here. Several millimeters in diameter. But that's where it's kind of getting its deal. You can see the segments. And so those polyps can all of a sudden be producing a ton of other jellyfish, you know, right there. And I've even seen some people that consider the Medusa almost basically just sexual dispersion of gametes. They're actually not important, and it's very interesting. But there was a discussion I found somewhere that said this is the jellyfish. The polyp is the jellyfish. This is similar to an achene on a seed, which achenes are like little lobes that catch the wind and helps them fly around. And that person was basically saying that's basically what this Medusa form is, and all it's doing is eating enough energy to keep those eggs and sperm surviving. That's a little basic, and I don't think that's quite there, but it's still very crazy to just say, you know, this polyp just could continually produce Medusa. And you can see why you can have things called jellyfish blooms, which is when a ton of jellyfish all of a sudden appear in an area. If you have a lot of you know, these little polyps, and they get enough energy and they replace a ton, yeah, you could easily have a ton of Medusa. It's just a really weird life cycle, and just a weird animal group in general. I encourage you, please go start doing your own deep dive. You're gonna learn a ton. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. Hope you enjoyed this special animal video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, please click the link down below. It is by no means expected, but very much appreciated. Love you all. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. And peace.